Hi, Mark, and today I want to talk about plans of the Labour Party regarding election rights for EU citizens in Britain after Brexit. It goes without saying that EU citizens should be given the right to vote in all UK elections. That was said by Keir Starmer, leader of Britain's opposition Labour Party, signalling a possible softer stance between the EU and its former member in case he becomes Prime Minister. In a speech, Starmer said the idea that EU citizens residing in the UK shouldn't be able to vote is wrong and something should be done about it. The opposition party, which currently has a 15 to 20 point lead over the ruling Conservative Party in the opinion polls, changed its stance to guarantee EU citizens and third country nationals the right to vote in all elections ahead of the last general election in December 2019. The election, dominated by the question of whether the UK should leave the EU or hold a second referendum on membership, produced a landslide victory for former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative Tory party, who then officially ousted the UK in January 2020 and brought it out of the EU. It's increasingly likely that Labour will maintain the strategy on voting rights, which could refer to some 3.5 million EU citizens who have settled status under the UK's post-Brexit settlement programme and thus have the right to permanent residence in the United Kingdom. The next UK general election must be held no later than January 2025, although most analysts expect the polls to be held next year. Let's consider someone who has been here for 30 years, who literally put their roots here, who's married to a Brit and has children here, Starmer said. This is where they live, this is where they make their contribution. It's very difficult to say that you should vote in your country of origin. It doesn't stand up to common sense. Full voting rights in the UK are currently restricted to citizens of the UK, of Ireland and Commonwealth countries, although EU citizens can still vote in local elections like the ones we just had. Starmer has also considered lowering the voting age in the UK from 18 to 16. The Conservatives have criticised the two proposals, calling them a plan by Labour to fix future elections, which EU citizens and young voters favouring parties like Labour and the Liberal Democrats over the Tories. No other EU country allows EU citizens who are not nationals to vote in general elections. That was said by Tory leader Greg Hans. They also claimed that voting rights for EU citizens could be a precursor to a new campaign to bring the UK back into the EU. Starmer denied that offering the vote to EU nationals amounted to an attempt to reverse Brexit, which his Labour Party has largely accepted as a fact of life since it suffered a crushing defeat while running on a manifesto of holding a second referendum on leaving the EU in 2019. A Conservative spokesperson had told The Telegraph any move on voting rights amounted to Starmer laying the groundwork for a fresh referendum. There is no plan to reverse Brexit, Starmer said. I don't know how many times I've said there is no case for going back in. We are going to make Brexit work. Well, he still has to tell me how he wants to do that. But Greg Hans is right on one point, though. EU citizens have certain election rights when residing in other EU member states. These rights are established to promote the principles of free movement and non-discrimination within the European Union. And there are some key aspects of election rights for EU citizens in other EU member states I want to bring today because Hans brought this up. There are the local elections. EU citizens residing in another EU member state have the right to vote and stand as a candidate in local elections in municipalities and regions of that country. And this includes elections for city councils, mayors, and other local government bodies. And then we have the European Parliament elections. EU citizens living in an EU member state other than their home country have the right to vote and stand as candidates in the European Parliament and the elections held in that country. This ensures that EU citizens can participate in shaping the composition of the European Parliament regardless of their country of residence within the EU. But there are conditions and registrations for this. EU citizens must meet certain conditions to exercise their election rights. These conditions generally include being a resident of the country where the elections take place and being registered on the electoral roll. Registration procedures vary between the member states, and so it's important to check the specific requirements in the country where the people have their residence. But there is the point of non-discrimination. EU citizens have the right to be treated on an equal basis with the citizens of the host country. This means that they should not face any unjustified discrimination or obstacles when exercising their election rights. The principle of non-discrimination also applies to candidates, ensuring that EU citizens can compete for positions in elections without facing undue barriers. And there is the problem with the dual voting. EU citizens have the right to vote in local elections in both their home country and the country of residence, as long as they meet the respective conditions. However, they can only vote once in the European Parliament elections, either in their home country or the country of residence. It's important to note that election rights for EU citizens in other member states are governed by EU law and by national legislation. For example, here in Germany, because of that, EU citizens cannot vote in the state or federal elections, so what you would call a general election. So Starmer, with his plans, would give EU citizens in the UK more rights than they would have in another EU country. About 3.5 million EU nationals could be affected by the proposals, including 2.6 million people who have already been granted pre-settled status. As I said, Commonwealth and Irish citizens can already vote in elections. And there will be a Crunch Labour National Policy Forum meeting from July 21st to 23rd, during which officials will decide what policies will be put to the Labour conference to form the final party manifesto, from which the general election manifesto will be drawn. It marks the first time since the 2015 general election that the NPF has been able to convene and officially start its manifesto work, though. But with the election rights and Starmer's argument, with people living in the UK for 30 years, and that they should have the right to vote. To be honest, if I change my whole focus of my life to another country and stay there for 30 years, why not get the nationality of that country and the passport of that country? That's what I don't understand. Of course, it's a big decision to give up your passport when you're from another country. But if that country is your origin only, and the whole center of your life is somewhere else, then you can apply for the passport of that country. And after 30 years, I think it will not be such of a big issue in the UK. The time, I know, is much shorter. So that is the way to do that. I don't think that this is a very just move to do so. As much as I'm against people having two passports, there are exceptions. The Northern Ireland issue is one part. Countries that deny their citizens to give up their passport is another, but those are the few rare exceptions where I accept two passports, that people can have them. But you have to decide what country is your home country. And so in that regard, I don't think why nationals from another country should vote for the central government of another country. Honestly. So I think this is a very politically based move, and the Tories are right in their argument there that Starmer wants this so that they get more voters for Labour. And we have the same discussion here in Germany about the age part. The Social Democrats and the Greens want the age for voting in the general election down to 16 as well. The Christian Democrats don't want that because the younger ones tend to vote more for on the left of the spectrum. It changes with age, by the way. I know that because I saw that from some people in my youth that I met in my youth from other parties, they switched more to the right the older they got. I'm again in the party I was when I was in school. I made an excursion to another, but I'm back. But It's an important topic to talk about. But in this case, I must say the Tories are right in their argument on both sides, with that they would give something to people they don't even have in the EU where they come from, and to give something, and the voting age is another point where it is just a political move to get more votes. And there I have to agree. I don't agree often with the nowadays Tories, but in this case I have to. And Greg Hans is right there. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.